Jaguar CEO Adrian Mardell has stepped down after the motor company's woke rebrand backfired massively.
In late 2024, one 30-second video accomplished what competitors, recessions, and technological disruption had failed to do for more than 100 years. It broke a luxury car brand that had survived since the early 20th century. No scandal, no recall, no financial crash, just a commercial. Within 12 months, European registrations collapsed by 97%. Sales fell from nearly 2,000 vehicles to fewer than 50. Dealerships across an entire continent went quiet. Executives resigned, governments commented, and a brand that once symbolized British performance engineering became a punchline. The most remarkable part? The ad didn't feature a single car. Not one frame, not one engine sound, not one driving shot. If you like watching billion-dollar brands destroy themselves in slow motion, subscribe, because unlike their strategy, this channel actually compounds. To understand how this happened, you have to understand what the company thought it was doing, and what the audience actually saw. And more importantly, you need to understand the decades of heritage that vanished in 30 seconds. Before we get to the implosion, let's establish what was lost. This wasn't some struggling startup gambling on viral attention. This was Jaguar. Founded in 1922, the brand built its reputation on racing success and engineering excellence that rivaled anything coming out of Germany or Italy. In the 1950s and 60s, Jaguar dominated Le Mans. They won 5 times. Their E-Type became one of the most beautiful sports cars ever made, a vehicle Enzo Ferrari himself called the most beautiful car in the world. That legacy mattered. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was the foundation of the brand's value proposition. When someone bought a Jaguar, they weren't just buying transportation. They were buying a piece of British automotive history. They were buying craftsmanship. They were buying a connection to something that felt permanent. That emotional contract, that unspoken agreement between brand and customer, had survived for a century, until November 19th, 2024. On that date, the company released a campaign that would go on to be studied as one of the most misaligned brand executions in modern marketing history. The spot was titled "Copy Nothing." It featured a series of models posed in brightly colored event-style uniforms. They stood in elevators. They walked through abstract pink architectural spaces. They held paintbrushes and sledgehammers. The imagery was stylized, editorial, and deliberately ambiguous. One male model wore a dress. The color palette leaned aggressively toward neon pinks and saturated pastels. The framing felt closer to a fashion house launch or a fragrance campaign than anything associated with automotive manufacturing. And again, there were no cars, not a single vehicle, not even a teaser shot of a grille or a headlight. Nothing that suggested this was an automotive brand at all. Viewers weren't outraged at first. They were confused. The immediate reaction across social platforms wasn't anger. It was genuine bewilderment. People thought it was a mistake, that maybe they'd clicked the wrong link, that surely the car would appear in the second half. But there was no second half. This was supposed to sell 6-figure vehicles. And it was selling what exactly? Confusion turned into disbelief when people realized something else had happened just before the video went live, something even more drastic than the ad itself. Before posting the new campaign, the brand wiped its entire social media presence. Years of content disappeared overnight. Product photos, heritage imagery, customer stories, motorsport history, gone, deleted, erased, as if none of it had ever existed. Imagine waking up one morning to find that a brand you'd followed for years had deleted every trace of its identity, every post celebrating the E-Type's 60th anniversary, every tribute to their Le Mans victories, every customer testimonial, every behind-the-scenes look at their craftsmanship. All of it vanished. In their place appeared slogans that sounded more like creative agency mood boards than automotive messaging. Delete ordinary, live vivid, create exuberant, break molds. These weren't taglines that spoke to performance or luxury or heritage. They were abstract imperatives that could have sold anything from energy drinks to meditation apps. But the most shocking change wasn't the words. It was the logo. The iconic leaping cat, a symbol recognized globally for decades, was removed. It was replaced by a minimalist wordmark in mixed case, justified internally as visual balance and modern harmony. The Jaguar itself, the animal that had defined the brand's identity, its power, its grace, its predatory excellence, was gone. This wasn't just a rebrand. It was an erasure. It was a public statement that everything the brand had been was now obsolete. Executives described the shift as exuberant modernism, a philosophical break from traditional British luxury. According to leadership, the goal wasn't to comfort existing customers. It was to provoke conversation, to disrupt expectations, to force the world to see them differently. They got their wish. Within hours, social media lit up. Not with curiosity, not with intrigue, with mockery. People compared the spot to perfume ads, art installations, fashion editorials, everything except a car commercial. Comment sections filled with disbelief. How do you sell cars without cars? Fire the entire marketing department. Who is this for? This looks like a Balenciaga ad that got lost. I genuinely thought this was a parody account. The reaction wasn't confined to enthusiasts. It wasn't just angry car guys in forums. It crossed into mainstream culture. Late-night comedians made jokes about it. Business news outlets covered it as a cautionary tale. Marketing professors started using it as a case study in real time. A century of brand equity built on craftsmanship, performance, and heritage had been replaced with sledgehammers and abstract symbolism. And the company's response to the criticism, they doubled down. Leadership insisted this was exactly the reaction they wanted. That controversy meant attention. That people talking about the brand, even negatively, was better than being ignored. And then a single comment turned confusion into global humiliation. On the same day the campaign launched, the CEO of Tesla posted a reply on X. "Do you sell cars?" That was it. 4 words. No rant, no explanation, no follow-up. Just a simple, devastating question. The comment went viral instantly. Millions saw it within hours. It became the most shared response to the campaign and set the tone for everything that followed. This mattered for one reason. The person asking the question wasn't a random critic. He was Elon Musk, the most visible figure in the electric vehicle space, the exact future the brand was attempting to pivot into. And he was asking if they even sold cars. The implications were brutal. Here was Jaguar, attempting to position itself as a future leader in electric luxury vehicles. And the single most influential person in that space was publicly questioning whether they were even in the automotive business. From that moment on, the internet's verdict was clear. The campaign wasn't bold, it wasn't visionary, it wasn't misunderstood genius, it was disconnected. It was a luxury car brand that had forgotten how to talk about luxury cars. Once the framing was set, the pile-on accelerated. Influencers mocked the ad openly, political figures called it corporate suicide. Commentators drew immediate comparisons to previous high-profile brand collapses. One viral remark captured the sentiment perfectly. "This makes me want to sell my Jaguar, and I don't even own one." Even people with no relationship to the brand felt compelled to distance themselves from it. That's when you know a rebrand has failed catastrophically. When people who have no stake in the brand feel embarrassed by association. When the brand becomes something people actively mock rather than aspire to. A major German newspaper ran a poll asking readers what they thought of the new direction. More than 90% said it felt wrong and no longer represented the company they recognized. Industry analysts began comparing it to other infamous rebrand failures. Gap's logo change in 2010, Tropicana's packaging disaster in 2009, New Coke in 1985. But those companies caught their mistakes quickly. They reversed course. They apologized and returned to what worked. Jaguar didn't. A handful of defenders argued that controversy was the strategy. That attention was the objective. That the company wasn't selling cars anyway, so the backlash didn't matter. That all publicity is good publicity. That people would remember the name. That this was a long-term play. That defense collapsed the moment the numbers became public. European registrations fell from 1,961 units to just 49 in 12 months. Read that again. 1,961 to 49. That's not a dip. That's not a correction. That's not a temporary market adjustment. That's a collapse, a 97% decline. Across an entire continent, dealers collectively sold fewer than 50 vehicles in a month. Think about what that means operationally. Showrooms sitting empty, sales staff with nothing to sell, service departments with no new customers. Globally, sales dropped from 62,000 units in 2022 to roughly 13,000 by fiscal 2024. In the United States, sales were down more than 80% from their peak. Showrooms that once moved hundreds of cars annually were now moving dozens. These weren't abstract figures. These were dealerships closing. These were jobs disappearing. These were real people whose livelihoods depended on this brand making rational decisions. The company had an explanation ready. They had intentionally halted production as part of a transition to electric vehicles. No cars were being made, so of course, no cars were being sold. Technically accurate, strategically incomplete, because the decline began before production stopped. Sales had been falling for months before the official production halt. Customer interest had been eroding steadily. Customers weren't just unable to buy, they were choosing not to wait. They were walking into BMW dealerships instead. They were buying Porsches. They were choosing competitors who hadn't deleted their entire identity. Here's the detail that removes all ambiguity. The parent company, Jaguar Land Rover, reported record profits that same year, £1.8 billion. Other brands in the portfolio were thriving. Range Rover and Defender models were selling in the tens of thousands. Land Rover was posting growth numbers. Range Rover was expanding into new markets. The market wasn't collapsing. The group wasn't mismanaged. The automotive sector wasn't in crisis. This specific brand was being rejected. And that distinction matters enormously because it means the problem wasn't external. It wasn't the economy. It wasn't supply chain issues. It wasn't the chip shortage. The problem was the brand itself. Dealership networks began shrinking. U.S. locations were reduced from more than 100 to fewer than 20 curated stores. Retailers waited for vehicles that wouldn't arrive for another year if they arrived at all. Behind the colorful visuals and abstract slogans was a far more uncomfortable truth. One that executives had known for years but hadn't been willing to admit publicly. Executives had quietly acknowledged the problem years earlier. Before the rebrand, the company's models were generating almost no profit. Let me repeat that. No profit. They were selling cars at volumes that looked respectable on paper, but the margins were razor-thin or non-existent. Every vehicle sold was essentially breaking even or losing money. This wasn't reinvention from strength. It was a last attempt at relevance, a desperate gamble by a brand that was already bleeding out slowly. In 2021, leadership announced a strategy called Reimagine. The plan was radical. Exit the crowded mid-luxury market, abandon volume, move upmarket. Stop competing with BMW and Mercedes. Start competing with Bentley and Rolls-Royce instead. Fewer vehicles, much higher prices, margins instead of scale. On paper, the math worked. Sell less, charge more, restore exclusivity. Transform from a volume luxury brand into an ultra-luxury marque. It's the same strategy Porsche used successfully in the early 2000s. The same playbook Maserati has tried repeatedly. But executing that strategy required something risky, something unprecedented for a brand of this scale. They didn't just change the brand, they stopped making cars. By December 2024, every existing model was discontinued. Sports cars, sedans, SUVs, all gone. The F-Type, the XE, the XF, the F-Pace, the E-Pace. Vehicles that had been in production for years, some of which were profitable, all discontinued simultaneously. Production halted entirely until a new electric lineup could arrive in 2026. Leadership called it a firebreak, a deliberate pause meant to separate the old brand from the new one, a complete break with the past. Marketing experts warned of the danger immediately. You cannot survive on aspiration alone. You cannot build a business on people who admire the brand but never buy the product. But leadership was convinced that the old customer base wasn't worth keeping. The goal was to attract younger, wealthier buyers who had never considered the brand before. Buyers who didn't care about Le Mans victories in the 1950s. Buyers who weren't emotionally attached to the E-Type. Buyers who wanted something radically different. The campaign was designed to force attention, to make people stop and ask, "What is this?" And in isolation, the strategy wasn't irrational. Plenty of brands have successfully pivoted to new audiences. Apple did it. Gucci did it. Porsche did it. The execution was the problem. Provocation works when it reinforces a coherent identity, when it amplifies what makes you different, when it celebrates your uniqueness. Here, it erased one. Instead of building on a century of performance and craftsmanship, the campaign actively rejected it. Instead of showing the world what a modern Jaguar could be, it showed them paint and sledgehammers. By mid-2025, the pressure reached the executive level. After more than 3 decades with the company, the CEO announced his retirement. Officially, it was voluntary. Officially, it was planned. Officially, it had nothing to do with the rebrand. Unofficially, the timing told another story. Ironically, under his leadership, the parent group had achieved its strongest financial performance in a decade. Debt had been slashed by billions. Profits were up. Land Rover was thriving. By traditional metrics, he succeeded, but traditional metrics weren't what the world was watching. Days after the retirement announcement, a former US president publicly attacked the campaign, calling it disgraceful and linking it directly to executive fallout. The comparison to Bud Light was immediate. Whether the CEO jumped or was pushed remains debated. What's clear is that his departure marked the end of the most controversial chapter in the brand's history and raised an urgent question. Was the damage permanent? This wasn't the first time a major brand misread the cultural moment. A year earlier, Bud Light learned the same lesson. A campaign misaligned with its core audience triggered a boycott that erased billions in value almost overnight. Before that, Gillette ran an ad that lectured its own customers and watched sales decline for years afterward. The pattern is consistent. Brands that signal embarrassment toward their existing customers lose those customers, and they rarely gain enough new ones to compensate. The takeaway isn't political, it's structural. You cannot attract new customers by alienating the ones who built your brand. You cannot delete your history and expect loyalty to survive. You cannot ask people to forget a century of identity and trust you with a decade of speculation. Successful reinvention builds on trust. Failed reinvention treats trust as disposable. This wasn't about fashion, it wasn't about aesthetics, it wasn't even about controversy. It was about legitimacy. The fastest way to lose trust is to signal embarrassment toward the people who supported you. When a brand stops defending what made it valuable, customers stop defending the brand. Authenticity compounds. Trend chasing decays. This brand didn't die because it changed. It died because it erased itself before earning permission to become something new. The vehicles may return in 2026. They may be beautiful. They may be technically brilliant. But will anyone care? Will anyone remember why Jaguar mattered? Or will they just remember the ad with the sledgehammers? So what do you think? Is this a necessary gamble or a case study in brand suicide? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more breakdowns of billion-dollar mistakes. And if you think this one was wild, wait until you see what's next.